The morning of June 2013 began with an unusual commotion on the red dirt road in Gainesville, Florida. 7 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of an old mobile home nestled among pines and weeds. Neighbors peeked through curtains as federal agents in bulletproof vests fanned out around the place, the crackle of radios humming in the humid air. Inside, Manuel Alvarez, 58, was cracking open his first beer of the day, a habit he'd kept through years of reclusive silence. The knocking came sharp at exactly 7 a.m. Manuel Alvarez, North Carolina State Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Jennifer Langford, Winston-Salem, 1980. Witnesses said. His hand trembled slightly as he set the can down, but his face remained eerily calm, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for 33 years. March 1980. Winston-Salem, North Carolina. In the foggy early morning, the road into Cedar Glen Apartments was still quiet, with only the wind rustling through the pines behind the parking lot. In her second-floor apartment, Jennifer Langford, 24, an office worker at Pilot Life Insurance Company, was getting ready for an ordinary workday. She lived alone, went to work punctually, and was known in the office for never being late. The night before, Jennifer had called her mother, saying she'd stop by over the weekend. Nothing unusual, except her voice sounded tired, maybe from work. Around 6 a.m., a downstairs neighbor heard the radio playing the weather report, then the sound of running water. Another said they vaguely saw her in a light-colored blouse heading down the hallway, purse in hand, but no one was sure of the time. By 8 a.m., at the Pilot Life office on Liberty Street, Jennifer's desk was still tidy. Her coffee mug from the day before sat untouched, and the desk phone rang a few times with no answer. Her department manager noticed her absence at the morning meeting, something that rarely happened. By late morning, coworkers tried calling her home number several times, hearing only long rings with no response. One recalled, "Jennifer always called if she was running late, always, not that day." In the afternoon, her mother, Margaret Langford, started feeling uneasy. Jennifer hadn't called home as usual and wasn't answering. At 5 p.m., she told her husband, Walter Langford, that something was wrong. "She's never this quiet," she said. They drove their green Oldsmobile more than 20 minutes to Cedar Glen, hoping it was nothing. Maybe Jennifer had overslept. Maybe she'd forgotten to plug in the phone. But her 1978 silver Chevrolet Malibu wasn't in the parking lot as usual. The apartment door was locked. They knocked several times, calling their daughter's name, with no answer. Margaret pressed her ear to the door, hearing absolute silence inside. Neighbors said they hadn't heard anything unusual all day. The building manager, Bill Hatcher, brought a spare key to open it. The door swung open to reveal a space too still, the living room neat, the desk lamp still on. Jennifer's usual work jacket draped over a chair. The bedroom tidy, bed made, suitcase half open, with a few folded clothes unfinished. In the bathroom, steam still clung faintly to the mirror, a wet towel hung, the toothbrush still in its glass of water. No signs of struggle or break-in. Her keys and purse were gone, but everything else intact. The apartment was still warm, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment, and would return any second. Walter stood frozen in the middle of the room, looking around. Margaret called her daughter's name in desperation, but only the wall clock answered. As the sun dipped behind the red brick rooftops, the two left the apartment and headed straight to the public payphone near the complex entrance. Margaret picked up the receiver, dialing the sheriff's office. Her voice trembled, nearly breaking as she said, "We need help. My daughter Jennifer Langford, she's disappeared." Margaret gripped the receiver tightly, her voice shaking with each word. 15 minutes later, the first Forsyth County Sheriff's Office patrol car turned into the parking lot, its blue lights sweeping across the trees and damp brick faces of Cedar Glen Apartments. 2 officers knocked on the second-floor apartment door, where the Langford family still waited. As the door opened again, the steam smell from the bathroom had faded, but everything remained as before, silent, unnaturally tidy. A young officer gently asked, "What time does she usually leave for work, ma'am?" "Before 6:30. She goes in early, never late. The man nodded, scanning the small apartment, moving slowly, as if afraid to disturb the lingering morning air. He crouched down, touching the carpet near the door where a faint dirt streak trailed. "Looks like someone stepped in here," he said quietly, then turned to his partner to call for backup from the car. While the police checked each room, Margaret stood motionless at the window, staring out at the empty parking lot below. The first spring breeze rustled the curtains lightly, making a soft whisper. Walter paced the living room, trying to stay calm, but his eyes never left the desk phone. Each time it rang, they both jumped, hoping for their daughter's voice. But it was only cold questions from the police. Near midnight, 2 more police cars arrived. They cordoned off the apartment complex, shining flashlights down the hallways, knocking on every door. A few neighbors said they'd seen Jennifer the night before when she took mail to the box. No one remembered seeing anything that morning. No screams, no strange noises. Everyone repeated the same thing. Nobody heard anything. In Jennifer's apartment, police collected a few items they deemed important: a water glass with a lipstick smudge, a few hairs caught on the blouse, and a faint shoe print near the back door. Everything was placed neatly on the table, noted with glances rather than procedure. An older officer shook his head. She left here minutes after her shower and never made it to her car. Outside, patrol car lights reflected off the slick pavement. Walter stepped onto the porch, staring down the empty lot, whispering, "Where's her Malibu?" But the question sank into the crackling police radio in the yard. It was nearly dawn when they left Cedar Glen. Margaret turned for one last look. The window of apartment hash 204 still glowed, the pale light filtering through white curtains as if Jennifer were still somewhere inside. The police promised to return at first light, planning a full area search. As the Langfords' car pulled away, the road ahead blurred in fog, leaving behind the silent row of buildings and swaying pines. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, the first search team was dispatched to Cedar Glen. They set up markers around the complex, combing every exit, every empty lot outside the fence. A young officer stepped off the porch, telling a colleague, "If she walked out of here, someone would have seen." But if nobody saw anything, she didn't leave on her own. The morning after, fog still blanketed the low rooftops of Winston-Salem, and Forsyth County Sheriff's Office vehicles lined up at the entrance to Cedar Glen. Apartments, the sky was overcast, the ground wet from overnight rain leaving shoe prints etched on the concrete path. Detective Richard Leland arrived early, steaming coffee in hand, eyes scanning the eerily quiet complex. He'd handled many missing persons cases, but what unsettled him was the tidiness of Jennifer's apartment, too perfect, as if someone had deliberately cleaned up. "We start from inside out," Leland told the group of officers gathered around a temporary map spread on a car hood. A red circle was drawn around Cedar Glen, a 3-mile radius. "Look for anything: clothes, shoes, bags, papers. Use scent dogs from the apartment door to the parking lot." 3 bloodhounds were brought in from the Davie County training kennel. They sniffed Jennifer's blouse, then were released at the apartment stairs. The team stood still, hearing only the dog's paws crunching on the wet pavement. The scent trail led behind the building, around the wooden fence, then along a narrow dirt path toward Highway 421. Leland and Deputy Moore brought up the rear, eyes fixed on faint tire tracks imprinted in the soggy ground. At the path's end, the scent vanished. One dog stopped, barking short toward the pine woods across the way. "She might have been forced into a car here," Moore said, unease flickering in his eyes. Leland only replied, "Or someone was waiting." The search team split. One group swept the eastern pine woods, another scanned the small lake bank by the highway. A young patrolman waded to the water's edge, probing reeds with a pole, while others followed every drainage ditch and dirt hollow. Nothing but a few shoe prints mixed in the mud, too indistinct to identify. By noon, light rain began falling. They returned to the makeshift headquarters in a van, spreading the map on a folding table. Leland marked the searched areas, deciding to expand half a mile south to the long-abandoned Salem textile mill site. "If someone wanted to hide a car or dump something, that's prime spot," he said. In the afternoon, a three-man team followed the dirt road to the old mill grounds, where weeds grew knee-high and rusted iron fences sagged. On the damp earth, one volunteer, Bill Carson, stopped, pointing right. "Something's glinting over there." In the dim dusk light, a silver car emerged half buried in tall grass. They approached, a 1978 Chevrolet Malibu. Doors shut tight, windows coated in thin dust and dry leaves. The license plate matched Jennifer Langford's. Carson stepped back, heart pounding. "Call Leland. Call now." When the police arrived, it was full dark. Headlights beamed straight at the vehicle, illuminating mud splatters high up the rear door. The Malibu seemed neatly parked, no scratches, no signs of collision. But oddly, doors locked, keys in the ignition, and the driver's seat pushed back farther than usual, too far for Jennifer's reach. Leland surveyed the area. No other tire tracks, just an old trail with faint tire grooves leading to the main road. He signaled everyone back, stringing yellow tape around the site. "Nobody touches anything. We process by the book." A crime scene tech crouched to check the ground around the car, spotting fresh shoe prints, deep treads, men's size. He marked them with small wooden stakes, then reported, "Looks like it was dumped here at least 2 days ago." As the lighting team set up floods, Leland opened his notebook, but didn't write yet. He stood staring at the silent Malibu amid the wet grass, flashing lights dancing off the silver paint. He knew he'd just hit a turning point. The missing person case had become something bigger. Outside the fence, rain started falling harder. A young officer asked, "Where do you think she is?" Leland replied without looking away from the car. "Don't know, but whoever parked this here, they sure do." The Malibu was secured on site, a tow truck arriving overnight to haul it to the Forsyth County Crime Lab. As the last lights winked out, the old textile mill sank back into darkness, leaving only fresh tire tracks smeared on the wet ground, sole evidence someone had been there and left quietly. The 1978 Chevrolet Malibu was towed to the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office evidence lot that same night. Light rain still fell, droplets pattering on the mud-speckled silver body. As the car door opened, a chill, damp smell mixed with faint gasoline wafted out, blended with the rusty tang of something left outside too long. Detective Leland stood nearby, arms crossed, watching the crime scene team prep their tools, rubber gloves, flashlights, and the familiar Polaroid SX70 camera. "Don't wipe anything yet," he said. "We keep it all pristine, dirt and all." Tech John Phillips was first to lean in, opening the driver's door. He tilted his head, eyeing the seat position, and murmured, "Pushed back way too far for her build." Jennifer was under 5'5", while the distance from seat to wheel fit someone nearly 6 feet. The gear shift was in park, keys still in the ignition, and on the floor were a few grains of red sand, not matching the soil around Cedar Glen. Phillips snapped 8 Polaroid shots in quick succession, capturing every angle: dashboard, back seat, steering wheel, gear shift and interior door handles. In the glove compartment, they found small items: a gas receipt from the BP station near Peters Creek Parkway, her Pilot Life employee ID card, and a cassette tape rolling loose. On the floor near the passenger footwell, a long hair clung to the carpet edge. Phillips tweezed it into a brown paper envelope, sealing it tight. "Could be hers," he said, "or someone else's." Leland circled the body, crouching at the rear where thick mud caked. Under the light, he noticed uneven smears, like someone had tried to obscure a footprint. He told Phillips to sample the soil, bagging it in a sealed glass vial. "Compare to the mill grounds dirt. If the colors differ, we know it was moved before ending up here." Opening the back door, a tech spotted a faint red streak on the metal handle edge. He paused, signaling Leland. The flashlight beam angled across the surface, revealing a dried blood smear nearly 3 centimeters long. Not much, but enough to thicken the air. "Sample it," Leland said. And close-ups. Phillips placed a numbered card, shot 4 angles, then swabbed with a sterile solution on a cotton tip. Meanwhile, another tech dusted for prints. They applied black powder and soft brushes to the windows and steering wheel. Under the lights, a few clear but overlapping prints emerged, smudged by rain. All were lifted onto clear tape for preservation. Not great, the tech said. Might be tough to match with current systems. In 1980, there was no national AFIS database. Print comparisons relied on local criminal records. Leland peered through the windshield, eyes lingering on the rearview mirror. On its surface, he saw a faint smear, possibly from someone adjusting it. "Remove the whole mirror," he said. "Don't clean it." He stepped back, taking in the car, parked straight, as if the driver hadn't been in a rush. No scratches, no impact signs. Only the dry leaves and settled mud showed it sat there over a day. After collecting samples, they checked the engine temp. The gauge read low, fully cooled. Leland noted mentally, left overnight, at least since yesterday morning, that fit Jennifer's disappearance timeline. Before leaving the lot, he paused to look at the Malibu again. A Polaroid flash popped, freezing the silent car in pale light amid shadows and drifting mist. No words, just the whir of film ejecting. Phillips handed him the developing shot, the silver body stark against black grass, windows reflecting blue patrol lights. "Where do you think she is?" Moore asked, holding an evidence bag. Leland stared at the emerging photo, voice dropping. If she left home in this car, it wasn't her driving. And whoever it was knew exactly what they were doing. He turned away, night dampness brushing his face on the breeze. Behind, the team began tarping the car, sealing doors, prepping it for transport to the Forsyth County Crime Lab. As they left the lot, the final beam faded, leaving smeared darkness on the grass, where the Malibu had lain, a quiet punctuation to what began the morning. Jennifer Langford vanished. The next morning, as the Malibu arrived at the crime lab, Detective Richard Leland gathered the investigative team right at the sheriff's office headquarters. On the whiteboard was a Winston-Salem map with a red circle around Cedar Glen Apartments and an X at Salem Textile Mill, where the car was found. He tapped the map lightly with a marker. This isn't a random missing person anymore. Someone knew this complex cold, knew her routine, and had time to drive the car there. They started screening a list of 15 people connected to Jennifer in the 48 hours before she vanished. First up was Robert Haynes, her boyfriend of nearly a year. He was a mechanical engineer living in Greensboro, over an hour's drive from Winston-Salem. They'd had a mild argument over the phone the night before she disappeared. Leland ordered Haynes brought in for questioning. The interrogation happened in a small second-floor room. Haynes looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He said on the night of March 11th, they talked about 20 minutes, mostly about how the distance was wearing Jennifer down. "We didn't break up, she was just sad. I said I'd come that weekend." Haynes showed receipts for a night shift at the factory, vouched by 4 witnesses. Asked about her habits, he said she was very cautious, always double-locking doors and parking in the same spot. She never lent her car to anyone. Leland watched Haynes's face closely, hands trembling slightly, but eyes steady, no evasion. At the end he added, "Do you know anyone who'd worked in her building?" Haynes hesitated. "Yeah, she mentioned some electricians. They were working right in her hallway," made her uncomfortable. The name Luis Alvarez came up for the first time in that remark. Leland requested the temp labor records from Cedar Glen's management company. The contract was a sketchy handwritten note with just a rooming house address and phone number, no birth date, no ID. Alvarez, 25, from Florida, had been hired for plumbing and electrical maintenance 2 weeks before the disappearance. Building manager Bill Hatcher said, he was quiet, worked alone, didn't talk much. But he was good at fixing outlets and locks. That last bit caught Leland's ear. "Locks?" he asked. Hatcher nodded. He had a master key to open any apartment for repairs. That afternoon, 2 officers went to Alvarez's suburban rooming house but found it empty. The landlord said he'd left on the morning of March 12th with just one suitcase. No one knew where he'd gone. An old roommate recalled, "That night he came home late, clothes muddy, didn't say a word, just turned on the radio and smoked. Next morning, gone." Leland returned to Cedar Glen, talking to neighbors around Jennifer's apartment. A woman next door remembered hearing heavy, slow male footsteps in the hallway that morning, not like her high heels. She'd peeked through a curtain crack and seen a man in a light gray uniform, toolbox in hand. Asked if she recognized him. She only said, "Could have been maintenance, I saw them around all the time." Back at the task force room, Leland spread crime scene photos on the table. Men's size 9 shoe print at the apartment back door, mud streaks around the car, driver's seat pushed back, all pointing to a tall man familiar with the building and with a key. Not ironclad evidence, but the logic fit every detail. Late afternoon, word from the crime lab soil samples on the car didn't match Cedar Glen's, but closely resembled the red clay mix west of town, right where the abandoned mill sat. The fingerprints on the car were too smudged for ID, but they found a grayish-green industrial fiber, the kind used in work coveralls. When Leland heard, he sighed softly. "That's the maintenance crew's uniform color." That night, he and Deputy Moore stayed late in the small office, desk lamp casting light on a suspect list. Robert Haynes crossed off, alibi confirmed. Co-workers, neighbors, building manager, no clear motives. Only one name circled thick, Luis Alvarez. No new address, no social security, nobody knows where he went. "He vanished the same day she did," Moore said. "And he had a key to the apartment," Leland replied, voice measured. "No need to break in, no noise, just wait for her to step out." They sent the information to the SBI Raleigh office to check fingerprints and compare temporary residency records. But at that time, technology was limited, no digital databases, tracking relied only on handwritten letters and faxes. Leland knew the case was slowing down, and without more evidence, they'd have to shelve it. Before leaving the office, he paused in front of the caseboard. The desk lamp reflected off the Polaroid photo of the abandoned Malibu. He stared at the scrawled note underneath. Possible suspect, Alvarez, Luis M. Then he turned off the light, saying softly to Moore, who was packing up papers, "Keep that name, he'll turn up again." After that night, Alvarez was officially listed as a person of special interest, but no one could have imagined it would take over 3 decades for that name to truly resurface in Jennifer Langford's file. When the first pieces of evidence were transferred to the Forsyth County Forensics Lab at the end of March 1980, the Jennifer Langford case had been the main topic at the police department for 3 straight weeks. On technician John Phillips's workbench, the brown paper bags were lined up, hand-labeled soil sample, vehicle, fiber, driver seat, blood trace, rear handle. He opened each one, placing them under the lab's pale yellow light. Everything was done manually, no DNA analyzers, no digital cameras, just microscopes, chemicals, and notebooks. Phillips started with the blood sample from the car door handle. Under the microscope, the red had darkened to nearly black-brown. He added a few drops of saline solution and benzidine reagent, waiting for the characteristic blue reaction to appear. "Positive," he murmured to his colleague. But that only confirmed human blood, not whose it was. When he ran serology tests to determine blood type, the result came back O positive, the most common type in the population. Nothing conclusive. The next sample was the grayish-green fiber found in the car. Under polarized light, the synthetic fiber structure stood out clearly. He compared it to a sample from Jennifer's blouse, light-colored cotton polyester blend. No match. Phillips jotted down a few lines, fiber synthetic, not consistent with victim's clothing. Next to it, a small piece of another fiber was found on the back seat, this one beige, similar to the kind used in men's work jackets. Could be from a uniform, he noted, or just old lint stuck in the car. The fingerprint results were no better. The carbon powder prints on the steering wheel and door glass were all smudged by moisture and rain. A few samples were sent to the comparison unit, but since there was no electronic database at the time, matching had to be done manually against hundreds of old ink cards. After a week, the response came back, no positive identification. Nothing matched criminal records in Forsyth or neighboring counties. Leland received the first forensic summary that Friday afternoon. He read each line silently, tapping his fingers lightly on the desk. Blood, O+. Fibers, no match. No identifiable prints. 3 short sentences, and none brought him closer to whoever had driven the Malibu to the textile mill. "We have everything except answers," he said, his voice hoarse with fatigue. In the days that followed, he tried piecing together the timeline of the morning Jennifer disappeared, but every lead dead-ended. Witnesses around the apartment complex offered nothing new. Luis Alvarez, the maintenance man with the master key, still had no trace. Dozens of hours searching around Winston-Salem yielded nothing but the silence of pine forests and dried mud around the car lot. In April, the local paper ran a brief story, "Police still have no leads in Langford disappearance." The case slipped from the front page, replaced by politics and sports news. Leland still came to the office every morning, but left each day with the same note: no progress. Finally, he signed the proposal to archive the file temporarily, awaiting more advanced testing technology. At the forensics lab, Phillips resealed all the samples, blood, fibers, hair, and soil, in rubber-stoppered glass vials, clearly labeled and placed in the evidence safe. He didn't know that those seemingly useless items would lie dormant for 3 decades, waiting until science could make them speak. One late afternoon, as he carried the evidence boxes to storage, Phillips ran into Leland in the hallway. The detective leaned against the wall, hands in his pockets, face weary. "Nothing solid?" he asked. Phillips just shook his head. "All fragments. The tech now, it can't go further." Leland nodded faintly, watching as the tech disappeared behind the steel storage door. On the cold shelves, those glass vials lay still, reflecting the hallway's pale yellow light, silent witnesses to a case everyone thought would be forgotten. By year's end, the Jennifer Langford file was officially labeled inactive case, insufficient evidence, and Winston-Salem moved into another summer, as if no one had ever vanished from there. 9 years passed since Jennifer Langford disappeared. Winston-Salem had changed, the old apartments repainted, the textile mill, where the Malibu was found, fenced off, and Cedar Glen now under new ownership. But in the basement storage vault of the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, Jennifer's files still sat, filed among hundreds of yellowed old folders. In 1989, the Forsyth County Police Department launched the Cold Case Review Project, re-examining unsolved cases from the 70s to early 80s. Detective Richard Leland, now a lieutenant, was invited to join as one of the field experts on the Langford case. He agreed, though he didn't believe there was anything new to find. "We might have missed something," the team lead said, as he opened the evidence box. Simple words, but they made Leland pause a few seconds longer than usual. The 1980 Polaroid photos were spread out on the cold metal table. Leland scrutinized every detail: the desk corner, the carpet, and especially the living room wall behind the sofa. He frowned, asking a colleague for a magnifying glass. Under the neon light, on the light-colored wall, a long faint scratch appeared, directional, like a metal object dragged across. That year, the photos were grainy, and no one noticed. Now, under magnification, the scratch sliced through the room's silence. "She didn't leave willingly," Leland said quietly. "Someone touched something here." The group fell silent. They began comparing it to original photos from other apartment crime scenes, but only Jennifer's had a similar mark. Leland recalled his first impression stepping into the room in 1980. The almost artificial tidiness and the cold, damp smell from the bathroom. If it was a stranger, he could have hidden in the complex, waiting until she came out of the shower, he said. They pulled interview transcripts of workers at Cedar Glen at the time, but records only had a few names. Luis Alvarez had no trace. When contacting the complex management company, all temp labor files before 1982 had been destroyed. One man vanishes, a stack of papers vanishes too, Leland remarked, his voice tinged with bitterness. During the review, they brought in the new crime lab forensics expert, Carolyn Pierce, who'd worked with the FBI to re-examine the evidence photos. Carolyn focused on the faint shoe print at the back door, enlarging it with an optical microscope, spotting a tread pattern different from civilian shoes. This is a cheap work-safe sole model, common for construction workers back then. Not typical for everyday folks, she said. That small detail matched what Jennifer had complained to her boyfriend about, those workers pacing the hallway all morning. After 2 weeks of review, the investigative team unanimously ruled out the voluntary departures theory, once floated in 1980, due to no signs of violence or robbery. With the wall scratch, worker shoe print, and Alvarez vanishing on the day of the incident, the case was now officially deemed suspected kidnapping and murder. Leland drafted a new summary, not to close it, but to keep it alive. In the final review meeting, he stood before the board, pointing to the faded, discolored photos. "We still don't know who he is," he said, "but he was here. This room told us that." When the cold case review ended, the Jennifer Langford file was relabeled with a new code, case hash 177 EFE, for Forsyth. All evidence was moved to long-term storage, locked in sealed metal cabinets among other unsolved cases. The last night before handover, Leland stayed alone in the office. He pulled Jennifer's old photo from the file, a young woman with a slight smile, eyes straight at the camera, fashionable curly hair. He placed it next to the Malibu photo in the textile mill, then turned off the light. "We'll meet again," he muttered, unsure if he was speaking to the missing woman or the man who'd made her vanish. As the storage door closed, the small red evidence seal light flicked on. On the attached paper, Leland's handwriting stood out under the light. Cold case hash 177 FE, hold for future review. The Jennifer Langford case officially went silent for the second time, but this time, it was labeled pending, and that meant somewhere in this city, the answers still existed. Time kept passing. After the 1989 review, the Jennifer Langford case fell silent again. Those who'd investigated gradually retired, and file hash 177F lay dormant in the basement evidence vault's steel cabinet. But in the early 2000s, a major change swept through North Carolina's forensic system. Forsyth County launched a standardized evidence management program, transferring all old files and samples to new storage standards. The new vault was housed in a concrete building behind the police headquarters, temperature held steady at 64 degrees Fahrenheit with humidity control. Each old evidence box was moved by sealed truck, resealed, and electronically numbered. Among hundreds of crates, the small box labeled Langford Jennifer, case hash 177 of a 1980, was placed on a new shelf. The faded writing on the cardboard cover still bore the pen marks of retired forensics tech John Phillips. Blood sample, fabric, hair, soil. In 2001, when Detective Mark Ridley joined the Forsyth County Cold Case Unit, he was assigned to review backlog files with well-preserved biological samples. In the list, the name Langford caught his eye immediately: disappearance, 1980. Suspected abduction, blood sample available. Opening the evidence box, he saw rows of small glass vials pencil-labeled, some still sealed with wax. "Better preserved than I thought," Ridley said to the tech room. By then, PCR DNA technology, polymerase chain reaction, was becoming standard in state forensics labs, allowing amplification and sequencing of genes from tiny samples. Ridley decided to request approval to send the Langford blood sample to the SBI Forensic Biology Section in Raleigh, North Carolina's lead lab. In May 2002, the small vials were placed in a nitrogen-preserved case, freshly sealed with tape, and shipped to Raleigh via secure vehicle. In the request form, Ridley wrote concisely, "Request for PCR DNA testing, possible homicide, 1980. In Raleigh, the tech team led by Dr. Ellen Briggs received the samples. They started by testing residual hemoglobin levels, then extracted surviving cells from the dried blood. After over 2 decades in storage, only a fraction of the DNA remained intact. "We can try PCR, but it'll be tough," Briggs said. 3 weeks later, the first results came back to Forsyth. The report was a single line: partial profile obtained, insufficient alleles for CODIS entry. In plain terms, they'd only read part of the genetic sequence, not enough for individual identification, let alone matching in the federal crime database. Ridley held the result sheet, feeling like he'd hit the same wall Leland had in 1980. But he didn't close the file. In an internal meeting, he told the chief, tech's advancing fast. If we store it right, in a few years this sample could talk. From then on, the Langford evidence was marked priority, retained for DNA retesting. All remaining samples, fabric scraps, hair, soil, blood, were fully transferred to the SBI Raleigh Evidence Vault, a state-of-the-art cold storage with triple seal security. A new storage code was assigned, Raleigh Storage Hash 2002F118. Ridley stayed in regular contact with the forensics lab, updating status. Each time he heard no tech good enough yet, he just nodded. Keep it as is. Don't discard anything. He knew many old cases lost chances because evidence got lost or degraded from improper temps. But the Langford box lucked out. Around the same time, the FBI's CODIS program expanded nationwide. Tens of thousands of DNA profiles were entered, including old North Carolina offenders. Ridley noted in his work log, "If Alvarez or whoever got arrested, the system will know." In 2004, visiting Raleigh to check the vault, he saw the Langford evidence box on shelf 4, next to a 70s case. On the lid, the handwritten Langford O+ sample now had an added printed label. Ridley touched the seal tape lightly, the cold metal seeping through his glove. "How many years?" he said softly to the accompanying tech. The other replied, 24 years, and this sample's still viable. In January 2005, when SBI Raleigh sent its periodic summary notice to counties, Ridley saw Langford listed under samples eligible for future STR short tandem repeat reanalysis. He smiled for the first time in months. To him, just knowing the evidence existed meant the case wasn't dead. That night, he returned to the Forsyth office, pulling file hash 177F from the cabinet. On the cover was still Leland's scrawl. "Cold case, hold for future review." Ridley added a new note in the top right corner, bold and firm, "DNA preserved, to be re-examined when technology allows." Then he turned off the light, leaving the room with only the fax machine's green glow blinking. In the darkness, the 24-year-old blood sample vials lay still in cold storage, waiting until science grew strong enough to retell the story humans had forced silent for nearly a quarter century. In fall 2012, Detective Mark Ridley, now working with the SBI Cold Case Initiative, a statewide program formed to review unsolved cases viable for next-gen DNA reanalysis, had dozens of files stacked high on his desk, mostly 70s and 80s cases. Among them, one name jumped out immediately: Jennifer Langford, case hash 177F. The faded label on the box cover recalled the 2005 report, sample eligible for STR reanalysis. He slowly opened the file, yellowed papers crumbling out, and an old Polaroid of the 1978 Chevrolet Malibu surfaced. From that moment, he knew he'd pick this case. 7 years had passed since Ridley last saw the Langford evidence box in Raleigh storage. Contacting the SBI Forensic Biology section, the techs confirmed the samples were intact, preserved in the cold vault under code hash 2002F118. They agreed to reanalyze using STR Identifier Plus, a new kit that could amplify fragmented short DNA segments from old samples, something early PCR couldn't do. On October 12, 2012, the vials were transferred to the main Raleigh lab. Among them, the fabric scrap with dried blood from the Malibu door handle and the swab from the driver's floor mat. Ridley personally signed the transfer log. He stood in the observation room, peering through the window as the techs in protective gear began extraction. Under white lights, clear solution drops were added to test tubes, then spun in a slow centrifuge. "If the DNA chain's there, this machine'll find it," one tech said, adjusting the digital timer. 3 days later, the first results appeared. Electrophoresisa's gel bands glowed under UV, straight, clear lines, better than expected. "We have a full profile," announced Dr. Briggs, now lab director. Ridley held his breath as she handed him the printout. All 20 genetic loci read complete. The DNA from the door handle and car mat matched perfectly. Same male individual. Time doesn't kill DNA, she said, her voice tinged with professional pride. On October 17th, Ridley filled out the form to upload the sample to the National CODIS database. In the top corner he handwrote a note, reopened 2012. Possible offender may have relocated out of state. As the clerk entered the data, he sat back in his office, watching the screen flash processing request, then go dark. We just gave her a voice, he whispered. 3 weeks of tense waiting passed. In that time, Ridley reread the entire old file. Detective Leland's 1980 notes, line by line, scene photos of shoe prints and wall scratches. He cross-referenced everything with current Winston-Salem maps, where Cedar Glen apartments had been razed for new housing. Each time he looked at the original apartment photo, he wondered, if Leland were alive, what would he think, knowing tech finally caught up to his case. Early November, on a gray afternoon as Ridley packed papers, the internal phone buzzed. The tech room staffer's voice came over the speaker. Detective Ridley? We just got a hit from the FBI, CODIS national match confirmed. Ridley froze, his heart racing. Match where? Florida. Luis Manuel Alvarez, 58. Prior conviction for sexual assault in 1999. He sat silent for seconds, gripping the receiver. That name, after over 30 years, had finally returned. The one Leland had circled in red in the original file. Ridley closed his eyes, picturing the rain-slicked Polaroid of the abandoned Malibu. Everything seemed to close in a circle. The next day, he flew to Raleigh for official confirmation. The FBI report attached stated, probability of random match, 1 in 1.1 billion. The DNA on Jennifer Langford's car matched Luis Manuel Alvarez's profile exactly. The man who'd temp worked at Cedar Glen Apartments in 1980. In his office, Ridley placed 2 photos side by side, the old Polaroid of the Malibu and Alvarez's 1999 mugshot. He stared long, then closed the file, his voice low like a promise. 32 years, Jennifer. We finally found him. Outside the window, a North Carolina afternoon drizzled thin rain onto the misty streets. In the dim light, a small evidence box still sat on the table, the final silent witness just awakened after more than 3 decades. The CODIS national hit confirmed message arrived in the afternoon of November 8, 2012. And within an hour, the SBI Raleigh cold case room buzzed to life, after years of dormancy. Detective Mark Ridley sat motionless before the screen, watching the name Luis Manuel Alvarez repeat across the FBI results report. Each line hit like metal tapping on cold steel. Match probability, 1 in 1.1 billion. Origin, DNA sample. Vehicle handle carpet stain. Langford case hash, 177F. 32 years of silence, and now, a single name had surfaced. Ridley leaned back deep into his chair, staring out the office window. Fine rain scattered on Hillsborough Street, headlights reflecting off the fogged glass. In his mind, old details resurfaced. The Malibu abandoned in the wasteland, driver's seat pushed back, faint dried blood smear, and the face Leland had circled in red pen in the 1980 file. Alvarez, you're still in this story, Ridley murmured, almost to himself. The first step was verifying demographic records. He contacted the Forsyth County Records Department, requesting a trace on workers registered as temps at Cedar Glen in 1980. 2 days later, a faxed copy of the employment form arrived at the office. Luis M. Alvarez, Maintenance Worker Unit 1A, Cedar Glen Apartments, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The address matched perfectly. On the same sheet, a handwritten note remained, issued master key by building manager February 28, 1980. Ridley stared at that date, February 28, just 2 weeks before Jennifer vanished. Opportunities no longer random, he said to his partner. Next, he sent a formal request to the FBI Charlotte field office for expanded biometrics checks. Alvarez, per Florida criminal records, had been fingerprinted during his 1999 arrest for sexual assault. That data now sat in AFIA's automated fingerprint identification system. Ridley proposed comparing the faint prints collected from the Malibu door in 1980, ones that couldn't be manually matched back then. 3 days later, the response came from the crime lab. Under the header, Re-exam request, Langford case. The results stood clear. AFIA's match, 12-point correspondence confirmed. One of the faintest prints on the interior door handle matched Luis Alvarez's right index finger exactly. In the report's bottom right corner, the italicized line, verification by independent analyst, confirmed November 13, 2012, seemed to brighten Ridley's room. He stood, gripping the printout tight. "So we've got both DNA and prints," he said, emotion slipping into his voice. 32 years, and he never escaped what he touched. That evening, Ridley stayed late at the office. He played an old tape from storage, the recording of Detective Leland's 1980 interview with one of the Cedar Glen workers. The tape hissed, the man's voice trembling. "There was a guy named Alvarez. He had the master key, wandered around at night. I didn't like him." Ridley stopped the tape, sitting still for a long time. Leland had been right. All those suspicions back then, now proven by tech he never lived to see. The next morning, Ridley assembled the investigative team. Each piece of evidence was laid out like an irrefutable logic chain. Alvarez worked at Cedar Glen, while Jennifer lived there. Had the master key, free access, vanished right after the day she disappeared. DNA matches blood sample in victim's car, fingerprint confirmed by AFIA's 12-point match. "No reasonable doubt," Ridley said. "We move to the next step, probable cause report." On the afternoon of November 14th, he sat alone in his office, writing the 8-page report. The keys clicked steadily. Based on biological evidence obtained from the victim's vehicle, Langford, Jennifer, 1980, and forensic reanalysis conducted by the State Bureau of Investigation in 2012, probable cause exists to believe that Luis Manuel Alvarez, Doe B, 1954, did unlawfully abduct and cause the death of the victim. When finished, Ridley paused a few seconds before the last line. Recommend issuance of arrest warrant, out-of-state jurisdiction, Gainesville, Florida. He read every word again, then signed. The next day, the report went to the Forsyth County District Attorney's Office for a federal arrest warrant. Ridley personally sent a copy to the FBI Charlotte Field office. On the file cover, he wrote by hand in black pen, Case #177, Fear, reopened by DNA. Probable cause, established November 14, 2012. As he left the office, the rain had just stopped. Streetlights flickered on, orange glow stretching across the wet pavement. He paused on the steps, gazing at the misty North Carolina night sky. In that moment, Ridley thought of Jennifer Langford, the young woman who'd left her Cedar Glen apartment on a March morning and never come home. "We're about to bring you back," he murmured, as if the promise could span 30 years. Then he turned back into the golden light, carrying the reopened file, the one that would close one of Winston-Salem's longest unsolved disappearances. A week after the probable cause report was signed, Detective Mark Ridley returned to where it all began, the Forsyth County evidence vault. Jennifer Langford's 1978 Chevrolet Malibu still sat dormant in the cold storage shed, tarped for over 30 years. The silver paint had dulled, but the license plate, seal tags, and case #177, Fear, Do Not Touch, writing on the windshield remained intact. Ridley stood silent for a long time. He recalled Detective Leland's note in the file. "This car knows more than we can prove. Now, with new tech, the Malibu could truly speak." With him was Dr. Ellen Briggs from the Raleigh Forensics Lab, the one who'd run the STR DNA tests months earlier. She carried a device that looked like a handheld spray gun, with a hose and clear solution bottle attached. "This is the MVAC system," she explained. "It vacuums DNA from porous surfaces like carpets or seats that traditional methods miss. If any epithelial cells are left, we'll find them." As the tarp came off, Stale air rushed out, carrying scents of rust and mildewed leather. The room lights illuminated the steering wheel, gear shift, faded driver's seat. Briggs powered up the machine, the nozzle spraying high-pressure solution across the wheel surface, circling while sucking back the fluid laced with cellular microparticles. The sound was soft, steady, like the slow breath of a room long asleep. "If Alvarez ever drove this, his DNA's still here," she said, eyes fixed on the handle. It took nearly 2 hours, sampling the wheel, shifter, seat, floor mat. Each recovered solution bag was labeled and sealed. Ridley signed the log himself, MVAC sample, Malibu, Langford case. Before leaving, he looked back at the car one last time. Under the white lights, water droplets on the wheel gleamed in tiny sparkles, as if the Malibu were coming back to life. 2 weeks later, results from the Raleigh Forensics Lab arrived. The email subject was 3 words, "Full match confirmed." Ridley opened the report file, heart quickening at the first line. DNA recovered from steering wheel and carpet. MVAC extraction matches Luis Manuel Alvarez, at all 20 loci tested. Match probability, 1 in 1.3 billion. Not just a match, but 100% identical between Alvarez's DNA. From the Florida criminal profile and samples from the wheel and floor mat. This was no longer suspicion, no longer inference. Alvarez had driven that car on the exact day Jennifer vanished. Ridley printed the report, stapling it into the file. Under lead investigator, Mark Ridley, he handwrote a line, "Vehicle confirms contact. Suspect drove victim's car." As he picked up the paper, he felt like he could hear the Cedar Glen apartment door slamming shut in the past, the moment it all began. That afternoon, Ridley and 2 crime scene specialists returned to the Salem textile mill site where the car had been found. The rusted gate was now just a broken steel frame, overgrown with weeds and brambles. He spread a 1980 Winston-Salem city map across the car hood. Cedar Glen Drive connected to Highway 421 via a narrow branch, then cut through industrial land straight to the mill. "Let's put him on this route," Ridley said. They used markers to simulate the path from Jennifer's apartment. The car left the lot at dawn, about 8 minutes to the 421 turnoff. Traffic was light then, easy to drive straight into the mill grounds unnoticed. The map showed an old dirt road leading to the mill's north side, exactly where the search team found the Malibu. "Most plausible theory," Ridley said, is Alvarez attacked Jennifer right as she locked her apartment door. He had the master key, easy access, subdued her, and drove off. One officer asked, "And he ditched the car here to throw off the trail?" Ridley nodded. "Possibly. Or he planned to come back, but never dared." On the map, the route from Cedar Glen to Salem Textile Mill was under 3 miles. Ridley circled it in red pen, marking each curve. "This was her final ride," he said quietly. As they packed up, dusk began falling, casting golden light on the old mill's ruined iron frame. Ridley stood staring at the empty patch where the car had lain. Now just grass and dry leaves, but in his mind, he saw Alvarez driving the Malibu that night, headlights cutting through pines, tires crunching wet mud, then stopping forever here. He turned to Briggs, who was noting final results in her log. "Do we have enough?" she asked. Ridley replied softly, voice firm, "Enough." Now no one can deny it. As they left the mill grounds, vehicle lights swept the bumpy dirt road, the same one Luis Alvarez had driven 32 years earlier. Only this time, his tracks weren't buried in mud. Science had dragged them back into the light, undeniable. When the Malibu DNA results matched Luis Manuel Alvarez's profile perfectly, the investigation entered its final phase, field verification and arrest prep. Detective Mark Ridley and the SBI task force coordinated with the U.S. Marshals Service to track the man who'd evaded capture for over 30 years. Per federal system data, Alvarez now lived in Gainesville, Florida, under his real name, working as an AC repairman for a small private firm. 32 years, and he's just a phone call away, Ridley said, eyeing Alvarez's current photo, short gray hair, stocky build, sun-weathered face, but eyes still cold, like in the old mugshot. He knew the arrest needed ironclad proof. Courts wouldn't rely solely on old CODIS data without direct confirmatory DNA. Mid-December 2012, the team flew to Florida. They linked with the Marshals Regional Fugitive Task Force, setting up surveillance at the parking lot near the mobile home where Alvarez lived with his girlfriend. Mornings, he drove a green Ford pickup to work. Evenings, he often hit Tom's Taproom bar off Main Avenue. Ridley watched from a car, logging every habit, every small move. "He lives like he's got nothing to hide," one agent said. Ridley replied quietly, "But blood doesn't lie." 3 days in, surveillance executed a trash DNA collection plan, any item Alvarez discarded after use. That afternoon, he sat outside the bar, drinking beer, smoking, and talking on the phone. When he left, he abandoned a half-empty bottle and toothpick on the table. A pre-cooperating bartender quickly bagged the trash and handed it to a marshal's agent. "This is our shot," Ridley said, gloving up to seal the sample bag himself. The items shipped that night to the SBI Forensic Lab in Raleigh via special air courier. Within 48 hours, encrypted results hit Ridley's inbox. Just 2 lines: DNA extracted from beverage bottle and toothpick, full profile match to known offender, Luis Manuel Alvarez. Match identical to evidence from 1980 Langford case. Ridley read the first line over and over, then leaned back in his chair. Relief mixed with chills ran down his spine. The feeling every investigator gets when holding the truth. "No more maybe or possibly," he murmured. "It's him, certain." The next day, an emergency meeting convened at the U.S. Marshals Northern District of Florida office. Ridley laid out the full evidence chain: 1980 original DNA, MVAC car samples, and now direct trash. All 3 matched perfectly. An agent asked, "We wait for state warrant or go federal?" Ridley answered without hesitation, "Federal." He fled state after the crime. "It's interstate abduction jurisdiction. I want him with no way out." That afternoon, the paperwork finalized. FBI Charlotte forwarded the formal request to the U.S. Department of Justice, proposing an arrest warrant under unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Ridley signed as lead investigator, pen firm. That night, he sat alone in a small Gainesville motel. Outside the window, insects hummed in the warm December Florida dark. On the table, Jennifer Langford's photo sat beside the Alvarez file. 2 timelines, 2 lives, about to intersect one last time. Ridley closed his eyes, trying to picture that 1980 morning when the young woman locked her Cedar Glen door, unaware she was being watched. Early the next morning, his phone buzzed. A single message from the marshal's office: "Warrant approved, operation at 0700. Ridley gripped the phone, eyes on the brightening horizon. 32 years, thousands of investigative hours, dozens of people passing the case, all now distilled into one coming dawn. He whispered, almost just to himself, "Jennifer, we're about to close this." June 21st, 2013 morning, Gainesville, Florida. Dawn just breaking, thin mist still cloaking the mobile homes along Estable 34th Street. In the shadows behind a tree line, 4 U.S. Marshals and SBI task force vehicles had waited since before sunrise. In the front seat, Detective Mark Ridley checked his watch, the hour hand hitting 7 a.m. He nodded short. "Go." Doors on the black van flew open. Figures in bulletproof vests surged out. Hard knocks echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Federal marshals. "Open up now." From inside, a hoarse, sleepy voice. What's going on?" cut off as the door burst inward. Luis Manuel Alvarez, 58, was pinned to the floor in seconds. Metal cuffs snapped tight on his wrists, the click dry and sharp. He struggled, growling. "I didn't do anything." But Ridley, standing back, just watched him silently. After 33 years, the man who'd vanished from Winston-Salem was finally caught. On the transport ride, Alvarez sat still in the back, blank eyes out the window. As the vehicle merged onto the highway, Ridley turned to the marshal's agent beside him. "Get him to Raleigh. I want to interrogate him myself." That afternoon, At SBI headquarters in Raleigh, North Carolina, the interview room was prepped. Alvarez in a gray t-shirt, hands in soft restraints at the table, sweat beading on his forehead. Ridley entered, carrying a thick file bag, setting it down. He didn't speak at first, just pulled a chair, sat across. The room's air grew heavy enough to hear the tape recorder whirring. Louise, Ridley began, voice low and measured. I'm not here for Florida, I'm here for Winston-Salem, March 1980. Alvarez raised a brow, half smirk, half wary. I don't know any girl by that name, I just worked temp. Ridley leaned in, locking eyes. Cedar Glen Apartments, girl named Jennifer Langford, she disappeared. Silver Malibu. You remember? Alvarez shrugged, voice raspy. Don't know a thing. I wasn't there when it happened. 2 hours passed, Ridley keeping his tone even, patient, laced with long silences. Each time Alvarez lied, he just replied, "We'll verify that." No yelling, no threats, just silence, growing heavier by the minute. By hour 3, Ridley laid a stack of photos on the table. 1980 Polaroids of the Malibu, crime scene shots from the mill, and finally, the DNA report. Alvarez glanced, then looked away. Nothing to do with me, he said, voice starting to quiver faintly. Hour 4, Ridley opened the file bag, pulling a clear sealed envelope. Inside the SBI Forensic Biology section results sheet, bold center text, full DNA match. Luis Manuel Alvarez, Langford case 1980. He placed the paper right before him, sliding it gently. Ridley asked softly, "This is something you couldn't have imagined 30 years ago. You can erase tracks, but you can't erase DNA." Alvarez stared at the paper. Sweat began rolling down his temple. He glanced away, but said nothing. Ridley continued, voice almost a whisper. "We found your DNA on the steering wheel, on the car mat, and in the blood sample on the door handle. It all says the same thing. You drove Jennifer Langford's car, and you were the last one to see her alive." 5 hours had passed since the interrogation began. The small room held only the faint hum of the air conditioner. Alvarez sat motionless, his hands clenched together until they were white-knuckled. Ridley stayed silent, letting him confront himself. 1 minute, 2 minutes, then suddenly, Alvarez slumped his head onto the table, breathing raggedly. "Okay," he said, voice choked. "I'll talk, but not like you think." Ridley didn't move. He just nodded slightly. "Start, Luis." His voice trembled, halting. "That morning, I saw her come down the hallway. I just wanted to talk, but she screamed. I panicked, and then things got out of control." He raised his hand to cover his face, voice fading. "I didn't mean to kill her, I just wanted to scare her." Ridley sat still, eyes fixed on the man before him. He'd waited for this moment for years, but when it came, he felt no victory, only a cold emptiness. "Where is she, Luis?" he asked softly. Alvarez was silent for a long time, then answered in a voice almost devoid of life. "Behind the mill. Behind the old brick wall where I used to work. I buried her there." Ridley closed his eyes, clenching his fists. The answer he'd thought he'd never hear had finally rung out. 33 years after Jennifer Langford disappeared, the man who'd haunted all of Winston-Salem for decades finally bowed his head in admission. And outside, early summer sunlight streamed through the window frame, shining on the table where the truth had just been spoken. When the last words left Luis Manuel Alvarez's mouth, the interrogation room sank into silence. Detective Mark Ridley said nothing, just stared straight at the man with his head bowed, hands trembling slightly. After 33 years, the secret buried with time finally burst forth, each word heavy as nails driven into the cold steel table. "You said, where did you bury her?" Ridley asked again, voice low. Alvarez looked up, eyes cloudy. "Behind the old mill, Salem textile mill. There's a collapsed brick wall near the big water tank. I mixed cement over it, covered it. No one noticed." Ridley didn't respond. He stood, went out to the hallway, signaled the waiting agent. "Prepare an exhumation order right now. Get the forensics team to Winston-Salem." 2 days later, the SBI exhumation team arrived at the site behind the textile mill. North Carolina summer heat was stifling, Weeds grew knee-high, wind carried scents of rust and old cement dust. Ridley stood looking at the patch where the silver Malibu had once been abandoned just meters away. Now, he returned with the forensics team, this time not to search for clues, but to bring Jennifer home. The collapsed brick wall Alvarez mentioned was still there, covered in moss and vines. Under the moss, they discovered a rectangular concrete patch, gray and distinct from the surrounding soil. A technician crouched, tapping the hammerhead lightly, the sound dull, deep. "There's a void underneath," he said. Ridley took a deep breath, signaled, "Begin." The work lasted hours. Drilling hammers roared through noon, thick concrete slabs cracking layer by layer. Below was dark, damp, compacted soil. A sharp, old, cold smell rose. When the first shovel hit something hard, everyone stopped. A technician leaned down, brushed the mud lightly with his hand, revealing small, fragile bones curled in a fetal position. No one spoke for minutes. Ridley stepped closer, removed his hat, bowed his head. Among the dark bones, something gleamed, a small silver necklace chain, heart-shaped, half-rusted, half-still metallic. He recognized it immediately as the chain Jennifer's mother had described in the 1980 statement. "She was still wearing it," Ridley whispered. As the remains were carefully lifted, the forensics team noted every position, every detail. Around were scraps of fabric, part of a light-colored blouse, all sealed in metal boxes, transported to the North Carolina State Forensics Lab. That afternoon, the entire area was cordoned off. Local police fencing the old mill. Curious residents stood at a distance, silently watching the white vehicles marked State Bureau of Investigation drive away in the glaring sun. 3 days later, in Raleigh, the forensics lab completed the examination. Dr. Ellen Briggs, who'd discovered the DNA from the car blood sample, directly oversaw it. She used mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA technology, to compare bone samples with a fresh biological sample from Margaret Langford, Jennifer's mother. Results appeared after hours of machine processing. The bold line on the report, "Positive identification, remains are consistent with and genetically matched to Jennifer Langford, 24, missing." Since March 1980, Ridley received the results that evening. He read every word over and over, then placed his hand on the file cover. For over 3 decades, generations of investigators had passed through this case, and now, Jennifer could finally return with her name. The next morning, he flew back to Winston-Salem with a Forsyth County office representative, carrying the official notification for the Langford family. The small house where Margaret still lived had aged much, but the daughter's photo on the mantel was still bright as the first day. When Ridley handed her the confirmation paper, she didn't cry. She just gripped his hand tightly, trembling. "Thank you for not forgetting her." That afternoon, a small press conference was held outside the Winston-Salem police building. Ridley stood before the reporters, voice calm, thanks to DNA technology and the persistence of generations of investigators. "Today we confirm the remains of Jennifer Langford have been found. Suspect Luis Manuel Alvarez has been arrested and confessed. Justice may be late, but it never disappears." As he left the podium, light rain began falling. Droplets hit the printed photo of Jennifer on the board behind, the 24-year-old with a gentle smile, eyes gazing distant. For the first time in 33 years, Winston-Salem had answers. But for Ridley, those answers brought no victory, only final silence for a name he'd spoken through half his police career: Jennifer Langford. News of Jennifer Langford's remains being found spread across Winston-Salem in just a few days. The headline in the local journal now was concise: 1980 missing woman's body confirmed, suspect arrested in Florida. 33 years of silence closed, and North Carolina's justice system officially entered the final chapter of the journey. On July 2, 2013, the Forsyth County District Attorney's Office announced charges on 2 main counts: first-degree murder and kidnapping, resulting in death. Luis Manuel Alvarez, 58, was extradited to Winston-Salem via U.S. Marshal's plane under special supervision. As he stepped out of the vehicle at the county police headquarters, cameras flashed non-stop. To reporters' questions, Alvarez just bowed his head, silent. In the press conference, DA Michael Porter stated briefly, "Scientific evidence has taken us back to where justice was missed. The Langford case proves no crime is buried forever." Immediately after indictment, Alvarez was assigned defense attorney James Rutledge, experienced in old DNA-related cases. The first hearing took place in Forsyth County Superior Court. Rutledge immediately challenged the legality of the biological evidence, claiming the 1980 DNA samples were degraded and no longer legally viable. He demanded the court exclude all PCR and STR test results from the file, citing discontinuous chain of custody. Detective Mark Ridley and Dr. Ellen Briggs were called as rebuttal witnesses. Briggs presented the sample storage process, original glass vial seals, and transfer to SBI Raleigh Vault in 2002, then reanalysis in 2012. She stated clearly, "The preservation chain is fully documented in every phase, no evidence of degradation or loss." Ridley added technical details. The 2012 MVAC DNA sample from the steering wheel matches Alvarez's profile exactly, and completely independent of the old blood sample. No random coincidence possible. Judge Eleanor Mathers listened to the entire presentation, then declared firmly, "Motion to suppress is denied. The DNA evidence stands." That decision left the courtroom breathless. For the first time in over 3 decades, the charges against Alvarez stood intact. From then, the prosecution began reconstructing the crime timeline based on forensics and confession. They recreated the morning of March 12, 1980, 6 o'clock. Jennifer Langford showers and prepares for work. 6:20 a.m., Alvarez, with master key, enters Block 2 hallway. 6:25 a.m. She leaves apartment, subdued by him. 6:40 a.m. Alvarez drives the Chevrolet Malibu from Cedar Glen. 7:10 a.m. Car arrives at Salem Textile Mill area, where he assaults and kills her. 8 o'clock a.m. He buries the body behind the mill, covers with concrete. 9 o'clock a.m. Alvarez returns to the complex, pretends to work normally, then leaves Winston-Salem same day. Based on this sequence, prosecution argued the case was intentional kidnapping leading to murder, sufficient elements for first-degree murder under North Carolina law. In pretrial hearings, Ridley was often present, though his investigation duties were complete. He sat in the back row, quietly observing. Once, the defense attorney tried implying Alvarez panicked, no intent to kill, but Ridley just looked down at Jennifer's photo before him. The young woman's smile in her pilot life ID photo. He had 30 years to say that, he thought, but he only spoke when caught. In August 2013, Forsyth County Superior Court set the official trial date. Local media called it the historic trial, the county's longest case brought to trial via DNA technology. For Ridley, it was not just history, but the closing of a promise. Leaving the courtroom after the final session, he turned to look at the engraved words on the courthouse wall. "Justice delayed is not justice denied." He nodded faintly. "No more delays," he murmured. "This time, justice will be heard." In March 2014, nearly 34 years after Jennifer Langford disappeared, Forsyth County Superior Court opened what is considered one of the longest cold cases in North Carolina history. That morning, the courthouse hallway was packed with reporters and locals. In the front row, Detective Mark Ridley sat quietly beside Margaret Langford, her silver hair neatly pinned, eyes sunken but still bright with resilience. As police escorted Luis Manuel Alvarez into the courtroom, everyone almost held their breath. The 59-year-old man in a wrinkled shirt, aged face but evasive eyes, the one who'd vanished with Jennifer in 1980, now stood before justice. Prosecutor Michael Porter opened with a firm, clear voice. "Your Honor, this is not just a case about a crime, it's a story of 33 years of waiting." of a woman who left home on an ordinary morning and never returned. He turned to the jury, holding up the Polaroid photo of the silver Chevrolet Malibu found in the wasteland in 1980, and said, "Right here, evidence lay dormant for decades, until science made it speak." In the first 3 days, the prosecution presented a chain of scientific evidence bridging time. First was the STR DNA report, projected on a large screen, 20 genetic loci matching perfectly between samples from the Malibu's steering wheel, floor mat, and Alvarez. Dr. Ellen Briggs, state forensics director, testified directly. She brought the original vials, still hand-labeled from 1980, preserved in sealed metal boxes. "We checked seals, no tampering signs. Blood and fiber samples intact. New tech just reads what was always there. DNA doesn't lie," she asserted. Defense attorney James Rutledge tried to counter, claiming samples too old, high contamination risk, but Briggs calmly replied, "If contaminated, we'd have 2 different DNAs, here there's only one. And it matches the man sitting there, absolutely." The courtroom fell silent as she pointed at Alvarez. On day 4, prosecution continued with fingerprint evidence. An FBI expert confirmed Alvarez's right index fingerprint matched 12 points with the print from the Malibu door handle, far exceeding legal standards for identification. Additionally, vehicle paint analysis proved the Malibu had been parked in the Salem textile mill area where the body was found. Industrial paint dust from the mill matching samples under the chassis exactly. But the climax was the 2013 Raleigh interrogation confession recording. As prosecution played the tape, the room sank into silence. Alvarez's raspy voice echoed, halting, "I just wanted to talk." But she screamed, "I panicked. I didn't mean to kill, I just wanted to scare her." In the public gallery, Margaret bowed her head, hands clenched. Ridley placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, silent. Defense tried to pivot, claiming the statement coerced by psychological pressure that Alvarez had no intent to kill. But prosecution calmly presented the timeline diagram. Alvarez had master key to Cedar Glen complex, appeared in hallway at exact time Jennifer left home. His DNA on steering wheel, floor mat, door handle. Victim's body found exactly where he confessed. Porter ended the presentation with a line that hushed the courtroom, "Nothing in this story is random. Everything, from the blood smear to the words, leads to one man." In the final week, Detective Ridley was called as the last witness. He recounted the process from rediscovering the evidence box in 2001 to tracking Alvarez in Florida. "I don't call this luck," he said. "I call it the patience of time." In closing arguments, Attorney Rutledge tried appealing to sympathy. "My client is old, he regrets it." But Porter replied succinctly, "Jennifer Langford didn't get the chance to grow old." After 8 days of trial, the jury retired to deliberate. No one in the room dared leave. Ridley watched the clock, the minute hand crawling endlessly. Nearly 3 hours later, the deliberation room door opened. The forewoman, a middle-aged woman, stood, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Luis Manuel Alvarez, guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping, resulting in death." No cheers, just a collective sigh of relief. Alvarez bowed low, lips trembling but silent. Margaret Langford looked up, tears streaming, lips moving faintly. "Thank God." Ridley just sat still, hands clasped, eyes forward. As the trial closed, afternoon light flooded through the tall windows, bathing the wooden benches. 34 years, hundreds of people, countless sleepless nights, all wrapped in 2 words, justice. Leaving the courthouse, Ridley looked up at the pale blue sky. He thought of Jennifer, the silver Malibu, the small vials lying dormant in storage for years. "Now you're home," he whispered. And in the rustling wind through the pines before the courthouse, it seemed someone smiled, light as a final thank you. After the trial ended, North Carolina SBI officially closed one of the longest investigations in agency history. But for Detective Mark Ridley and his law enforcement colleagues, the Jennifer Langford case was not just a justice victory, it was a valuable lesson for an entire generation of investigators. In September 2014, the State Crime Lab released a white paper over 120 pages titled, "Preserving the Past, the Jennifer Langford Case, and the Science of Time." The document was sent to all police departments in the state, serving as standard guidelines for long-term evidence preservation. In the introduction, the SBI director wrote, "33 years passed, evidence still intact. Not by luck, but by those who believed one day science would be strong enough to illuminate the truth." The report pointed out 3 major errors in the 1980 investigation. Errors that delayed justice for decades. First, non-standard crime scene processing. Jennifer Langford's apartment was not sealed immediately after the disappearance was discovered. Dozens of people came and went, including family and apartment staff, causing some traces to be erased or contaminated. The report stated the 12-hour delay in securing the scene resulted in the loss of critical contact traces. Corrective measure. Since 2015, new regulations require all suspected criminal missing persons cases to apply the major scene protocol. The scene isolated within the first 30 minutes, with only the lead investigator allowed access. Second, substandard evidence documentation. In 1980, evidence was collected manually, without reference photos, and without encrypted tracking labels. Some soil and fiber samples had unclear exact locations, making it difficult to verify origins during reanalysis. Corrective measure, the digital evidence chain system was born. Each piece of evidence tagged with a unique QR code, recording its full movement history from scene to lab to storage. Third, lack of long-term storage protocols. The 1980 biological samples were stored in ordinary glass vials, placed in an uncontrolled temperature safe. This could have caused DNA degradation if not fortuitously transferred to cold storage in 2002. Corrective measure, all biological evidence today must be preserved in SBI's cryovault system at -20 degrees Celsius with continuous humidity monitoring and inspected every 6 months. The white paper also devoted a chapter to honoring John Phillips, the 1980 forensics technician who inadvertently laid the foundation for the entire case resolution. His notes store all might matter someday was quoted verbatim as a professional philosophy. The report concluded, science couldn't save Jennifer Langford in 1980, but precision and patience made her a symbol of modern forensics investigation. This case proves that truth doesn't rot. It just needs to be preserved properly. After the white paper's release, the North Carolina Police Academy added case study Langford to the required curriculum for the forensic evidence handling course. In classes, students reviewed real scene photos, sealed samples, and footage of the MVAC DNA extraction process recreated from the Malibu's steering wheel and floor mat. A part of the silver Malibu was even kept in the SBI Raleigh exhibit room, placed under thick glass, beside the caption, Exhibit 04, Steering Wheel Sample, DNA Evidence Recovered 33 Years After Collection. Ridley was invited as a speaker at the document's launch. He stepped to the podium, hair now streaked with gray, still holding a photocopy of the original file, signed by Detective Leland. "If he were alive, he'd be smiling," Ridley said. "We didn't just solve a case, we learned how to never repeat the old mistakes." As the ceremony ended, he passed the old steering wheel in the display case, pausing for a few seconds. Under the white lights, the silver paint still gleamed, and the small plaque read, "The evidence that waited for time." That was the moment Ridley understood the Langford case had transcended the boundaries of a crime story. It became a compass for the entire field, a reminder that justice sometimes doesn't come quickly, but it comes if we know how to preserve the truth. When the guilty verdict was announced, and Luis Manuel Alvarez's name appeared across front pages, Winston-Salem fell almost silent for days. For residents here, Jennifer Langford's name was no longer just a case, but a collective memory tied to 3 decades of waiting and a belief that justice, though late, would still arrive. News of the trial spread quickly across the state. What if 3012? News opened the evening broadcast with the anchor's choked voice, 33 years of silence, ended by a strand of DNA. Major papers like the Charlotte Observer and Raleigh News and Record ran editorials praising the investigators' efforts and the power of forensic science. Journal Now, the local paper that had reported Jennifer's disappearance in 1980, printed a front-page spread with two contrasting photos. Left, the old Polaroid of Jennifer in her light office dress. Right, Detective Mark Ridley holding the case file on verdict day. The headline spanned across. Just doesn't die, it just waits. In Winston-Salem, former Cedar Glen Apartments residents held an emergency meeting. The complex had changed owners, but everyone knew where it all began. After much discussion, management decided to rename it Langford Place as a tribute. The new brass plaque at the entrance read, "In memory of Jennifer Langford, 1956-1980. Her story reminds us to protect those who cannot return home." A group of Wake Forest University students and locals raised funds for a small memorial plaque in a park near downtown, where old pines stood that Jennifer once walked under with friends. On dedication day, Margaret Langford, though frail, still came. As the wind blew, she placed a bouquet of white daisies at the plaque's base, whispering, "You're home now, Jen." The simple ceremony was moving. Those who'd lived in Cedar Glen in 1980 stood silent, some in tears. An elderly man, once a neighbor, told a reporter, "We passed that apartment thousands of times without knowing what happened. Now at least, she's remembered with the truth." The story also prompted the state's investigative community to reflect. Many local agencies began reviewing hundreds of cold cases, using new DNA tech for hope. A young forensics specialist in Raleigh said, "If Langford could be solved after 3 decades, no case is hopeless." Detective Ridley, after the trial, left SBI for early retirement. He didn't want to be called the case solver, just the promise keeper. Occasionally, he still returned to Langford Place Park, where the memorial stood. He'd sit on a wooden bench, watching kids bike by, sometimes telling them the story they only knew from news about the 24-year-old who vanished on a March morning, and the 30-year journey that brought her back. Each year, on March 12th, the exact day Jennifer disappeared, Winston-Salem police placed a wreath at the plaque. No big ceremonies, just a quiet ritual, a way to remind each other that their work wasn't just closing files, but holding faith for those waiting for answers. In a CBS special broadcast, the conclusion was read in the narrator's warm, deep voice. 33 years, hundreds of leads, thousands of search hours. A case thought dead with the last century, awakened by a dried blood drop left behind. In North Carolina, justice may come late, but it still comes. And in that quiet afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the old pines on the road out of Winston-Salem, Jennifer's plaque reflected the faint light, like a final affirmation. Truth never truly vanishes, it just waits for the right ears to listen. The Jennifer Langford story reminds us, in today's American life, that justice needs science, community, and personal safety habits all at once. Solving the case after 33 years wasn't luck, but proper evidence preservation. The 1980 old blood sample archived, then reanalyzed via STR Identifier Plus and MVAC from the steering wheel floor mat, the CODIS database, and investigators' persistence. Practical lessons. 1. In apartments, condos, demand management strictly control master keys. Background check contractors, maintenance workers require ID badges. Residents should verify maintenance identities before opening doors. The Alvarez master key detail at Cedar Glen shows this vulnerability is very real. 2. Safety habits. Share schedules with loved ones, vary times, routes. Watch parking lots early mornings, late nights. If spotting anyone tailing in hallways or lots, call 911 or non-emergency immediately, don't bother them. 3. When a loved one goes missing, families should preserve the basic scene, limit entry-exit, keep glasses, clothes, towels, as those small details save this case. 4. For communities, support forensics lab budgets, clear backlogs, maintain cold case units. Those investments enabled the 12-point AFES fingerprint match and Alvarez's capture in Gainesville. 5. Finally, don't overlook community memory, renaming Cedar Glen to Langford Place, erecting memorials not just to remember, but to remind us that in North Carolina, justice comes late. But it still comes if we proactively prevent, report, and persistently preserve the truth. If you believe justice, though late, is still worth waiting for, hit subscribe to join us in exploring more cases solved by faith and science. Thank you for following the Jennifer Langford story. See you in the next video, where we continue the journey to uncover truths buried by time.